Chapter 10. The Bubbling of the Pot. In our last chapter, one spoke of the Renaissance, that remarkable period of transition from the thought of the Middle Ages to that of modern times, that strange reawakening of religious and philosophical thought, and of art, letters, and material progress. The term Renaissance means, literally, new birth, and while generally used in the sense of a revival of anything long extinct, lost, or obsolete, it has an inner sense or meaning, i.e., the generation of the new individual or thing from the body of the old, the birth of the new generation of the thing. And the Renaissance of the 15th and 16th centuries affords an excellent illustration of this birth of a new generation of thought. This wonderful period of history manifested rebirth of nearly all forms and phases of thought. In philosophy, it brought about the death of scholasticism and the birth of the newer conceptions of reasoning and the tendency to go back to nature for truth. In metaphysics, it brought about the overturning of the popular Aristotelian thought and the revival of the Platonic influence under the form of Neoplatonism. In religion, it brought about the attack upon the absolute power and authority of the Church, which resulted in the Reformation and rise of Protestantism. In short, the Renaissance was a period of the sweeping away of old things and the replacing of them with new ideas, new forms, new names. The old, dying, gave birth to the new. In considering the influences at work today in the field of theological, metaphysical, and philosophical thought, one must be struck with their general resemblance to the influences operative during the period of the Renaissance. The same spirit of unrest and the desire for change is manifest. The same iconoclastic tendency on the one hand and the creative impulse on the other are seen in today's field of thought. The same demand for a new synthesis is heard from the schools of theology, philosophy, and metaphysics. The same revival of the search for truth, the same demand for and willingness to accept truth in whatever form it may present itself, just so it really is truth, and last, the same remarkable revival of interest in the Neoplatonic philosophy. All these are manifested today as strongly as they were in the Renaissance of the 15th and 16th centuries. In fact, many careful thinkers have expressed the idea that we are now entering into the stage of a new Renaissance, the new generation of thought, the Renaissance of the 20th century. And it is this tossing of all the old conceptions and thought into the great crucible of modern thought, the melting process now underway, and the new something which is to result therefrom that forms the subject of this book. We have seen herein the evidences of the great mental and spiritual unrest. We have seen the direct influence of transcendentalism upon this unrest. We have also traced back to ancient Greece and ancient India the beginning of the ideas observable in the latter-day conceptions. We have retraced the path of these ideas from the past to the present, showing their influence upon the present thought. We have had, in short, presented to us the various elements and ingredients which have been tossed into the great melting pot of thought. And now, before we venture to prophesy what the outcome is likely to be, let us consider the evidences of the bubbling of the pot. Let us see what is being brought to the surface of the pot by the ebullition of the various ingredients under the heat of the fire of mental evolution. For, be it remembered, this is not as yet the period of the new crystallization. We have not as yet reached the period of the new which is to succeed the old. We are merely in the transition stage, the stage of the bubbling pot. The periods of pouring out and cooling must follow later. Let us now examine the bubbling pot and what is being brought to the surface. In the field of theology and religion, we are brought face to face with evidences of the most marked and radical changes. Thoughts which 25 years ago would have stamped the utterer thereof as a freethinker are today calmly stated without protest from many orthodox pulpits. An examination of the heresy trials of 20 years ago will show that ministers were expelled from their churches for utterances which would pass unnoticed and unrebuked today. Thomas Paine, for a century proclaimed as a heathen and by an eminent personage called a dirty little atheist, is seen today to have been not an atheist at all, but merely a Unitarian born a century before his time. Were he living today, he would be received in full membership in many of the liberal churches, and his much decried statements would be seen to be practically in accord with many of the findings of the higher criticism of the church of today. The universities of today are giving utterance to the most heterodox ideas and statements, and yet only here and there an ultra-orthodox clergyman objects. The Christianity of today is an entirely different conception from that of the Christianity of our fathers. There is everywhere among educated people seen the desire to examine the fundamental basis of the theology and doctrine of the Church, and much that was formerly accepted without question is now being thrown overboard by the churches as unwarranted and irrational. The Old Testament conceptions are rapidly losing favor, and Christianity is growing more and more away from the doctrines based thereon. Christianity today is adhering closer than ever to the New Testament conceptions, and to the spirit thereof rather than to the letter. It is clinging closer to the Christ ideal than to the church doctrine, the latter being now regarded as due more to the influence of Paul than to that of his master. Christianity means a great deal less to many than it did formerly, but also a great deal more. It is not too much to say that, while theological Christianity may be declining, the idea and ideals of the Christ are gaining in favor. The theology of the Christian church is suffering, but the religion of Christ is gaining strength, in new forms and from new sources. Science and religion, so long thought to be inveterate foes, are now seen to be growing closer together, as new points of agreement are being reached. Science, throwing away much of its former materialistic dogma, and religion throwing away much of her old theological dogma, find that they are kinspeople and not enemies. It was the old clothing of each which hid the familiar form, and deceived each other and the onlookers. We hear much now of the religion of science and of the science of religion, surely a hopeful sign. Religion is now taking into consideration the problems, ideas, conceptions, and discoveries of science, applying them to the religious concepts, the result being the broadening and vitalizing of both. In the more advanced pulpits we hear ministers considering the most radical conceptions of science, not necessarily to oppose them, but rather endeavoring to blend them with the truths of religion. Both science and religion are now seen striving, hand in hand, to discover truth. The best in each camp care nothing as to which side shall make the discovery first, the only concern being that it must and shall be truth. It is true that there are the ultra-orthodox in both camps. There are scientists who hold that religion is a huge aberration of the human mind, and theologians who hold that science is atheistic, the handiwork of the devil. But the most advanced in each camp see the coming of the reconciliation. A writer of a recent scientific book upon God, when told by a friend that people will say that the book is written by an atheist, replied, "I would make no objection if they only modify the statement by saying, written by an atheist who loves God." Dr. Paul Cams, editor of The Monist, says, "The but evidence that the scientific spirit pervades the atmosphere of the present age can be seen in the influence which science exercises on religion. There it appears as biblical research, sometimes called higher criticism, in the study of the history of Christianity and of other faiths, and in a philosophical purification and deepening of the God idea." The same writer characterizes the monistic position by the following motto: "No agnosticism but positive science, not mysticism but clear thought, neither supernaturalism nor materialism, but a unitary conception of the world, not dogma but religion, not creed but faith." Passing from the field of theology and religion to that of metaphysics, we find changes equally revolutionary. From being considered the foggiest, most impractical, dreamiest form of speculative thought, we find metaphysics invading the field of the practical and workable. The new metaphysics, arising in response to the spirit of the age, is meeting the requirements of pragmatism, the test question of which is, what is it good for? How will it work? What can be done with it? Will it work out in everyday life? Strange as it may appear to those familiar only with the old conception of metaphysics, the modern demand is for a new metaphysics, a system of metaphysics, that may be used in everyday life, and that will be of some good to those who may master its principles. This tendency is deplored by those of the old school who hold that the subject of metaphysics must necessarily be entirely removed from that of the phenomenal world and the activities of life. But, be that as it may, it is unquestionably the fact that the trend of the latest metaphysical thought is in the direction of a practical metaphysics and away from the foggy speculations of the past. The material of the past, however, is being used in constructing the new metaphysics. No longer concerned with the abstractions regarding the probable nature of an absolute, which by reason of its very being must be without qualities, attributes, or properties, The latter-day metaphysician is inquiring how the underlying something manifests through the individual, and how the individual may avail himself of the cosmic forces behind and in him. The many are asking how the one may be manifested through them. As crude and naive as may be some of these efforts, nevertheless, this is the metaphysical problem of today. This is the quality demanded of the new metaphysics. Passing from the realm of metaphysics into that of philosophy, we find startling changes. The philosophy of today, instead of being merely an extension of metaphysical inquiry, has taken on quite a scientific spirit. The inductive method of reasoning has supplanted the deductive in philosophy. The scientific method is now the rule. No longer content with the attempt to explain the universe by an assumed principle, philosophy now begins with the universe and strives to work backward to its underlying principles. The guesses of the majority of the old philosophers are now regarded merely as the curiosities of philosophical thought. While many of the old thoughts appear in the new systems, they are used in connection with new methods of inquiry. Biology and psychology are blended into the philosophies of today, and philosophical theories must square with these branches of science in order to be accepted by thinkers. The old-school philosopher evolved a theory of the universe from his own inner consciousness, and then attempted to explain the universe by means of his theory. If the facts did not agree with or fit in with his theory, well, then, so much the worse for the facts. The new school of philosophers, on the contrary, have made of philosophy a science. Indeed, as Dr. Kams has claimed, philosophy is the science of sciences. This writer speaks as follows regarding the method of scientific inquiry demanded and observed in the work of the modern philosopher. Science is based upon observation and experience. It starts with describing the facts of our experience and complements experience with experiment. It singles out the essential features of facts and generalizes the result in formulas for application to future experience, partly in order to predict coming events, partly to bring about desirable results. Generalized statements of facts are called truths, and our stock of truths, knowledge. There are always two factors needed for establishing scientific truth, indeed, for establishing any kind of knowledge. They are, first, sense experience, and, second, method. By method we mean the function of handling the material furnished by sense activity, viz. Identifying samenesses and differences, comparing various phenomena, i.e., classifying and contrasting them, measuring and counting them, trading the succession of cause and effect, and arranging the truths thus established into an harmonious whole. The old philosophies are constructions of purely subjective significance, while agnosticism, tired of these vain efforts and lacking strength to furnish a better solution of the problem, claims that the main tasks of philosophy cannot be accomplished. But, if science exists, there ought to be also a philosophy of science, for there must be a reason for the reliability of knowledge. We may confidently hope that the future which the present generation is preparing will be the age of science. Here we leave the test of progress. Progress is not, as Spencer says, a passage from the homogeneous to a heterogeneous state. It is the realization of truth. Progress means the growth of soul, and growth of soul means growth of truth. The more clearly, correctly, and completely truth is mirrored in a man, the higher he ranges in the scale of evolution. While modern philosophical thought covers a wide range of speculation and inquiry, and embraces within itself a great variety of conceptions and interpretations, nevertheless it may be safely asserted that it is in its essence monistic. On all sides we see the disposition to attribute a oneness to the things of the universe, a tendency toward resolving everything back to a one fundamental something. Monism is undoubtedly the prevailing conception of modern philosophical thought. The disputes still rage fiercely over the question of what that one something is, but it is the exception for any leading thinker to question the inherent oneness of things. We have boldly seized the underlying conceptions of the Vedanta, of the Greek philosophers, of Spinoza, and others, and now positively assert in the words of the Hindu thinkers of several thousand years back, that which is one. Men call it by many names. All, from the most radical idealist to the most crass materialist, join in the refrain, all is one, at the last. Professor Pringle Pattison says of monism, monism is, in strictness, a name applicable to any system of thought which sees in the universe the manifestation or working of a single principle. Such a unity may be said to be at once the tacit presupposition and the goal of all philosophic effort, and insofar as a philosophy falls to harmonize the apparently independent and even conflicting facts of experience, as aspects or elements within a larger whole, it must be held to fall aboard of the necessary ideal of thought dualism, in an ultimate metaphysical reference, is a confession of the failure of philosophy to achieve its proper task, and this is the justification of those who consistently use the word as a term of reproach. The monism of today includes such widely separated schools of thought as those who claim that all is a manifestation of the one principle of spirit, those who advocate a higher pantheism in which all is held to be a manifestation of and in God, those who assert that there is but one and that one is matter, and those who, like Haeckel, may be considered as scientific monists, and who hold that the one is substance, possessing the attributes of extension, matter, motion, energy, and conscious mind. Thus today we witness the strange spectacle of the newest new, standing armed with the facts of modern science, biology, psychology, and physics, discarding the subjective philosophies of the intervening period and looking directly into the eyes of the oldest old, which found the conception of the one somewhere in that part of its mind which assures it of the existence of time, space, and causation. The new is ready to start all over again, just where the old began, but this time basing its advance on scientific research and reasoning, instead of upon mere subjective speculation and theorizing, or innate truths. There is one factor, however, which is especially characteristic of the age, the idea of meliorism. Meliorism is a belief in the possibility of the improvement of the world by human effort, generally implying the further belief that such progressive improvement is a fact and even a law of evolution. Meliorism is the happy mean between radical optimism and radical pessimism, between the idea that all that is good, and that which holds that all that is bad. Sully defines it as the faith which affirms not merely our power of lessening evil, this nobody questions, but also our ability to increase the amount of positive good. By recognizing the possibility of happiness and the ability of each individual to do something to increase the sum total of human welfare present and future, meliorism gives us a practical creed sufficient to inspire ardent and prolonged endeavor. Eraser says, faith in a gradual abatement of evil by the method of progressive evolution is now a favorite scientific faith. This faith may be regarded as the form which an unconsciously religious conception of the universe is assuming in professedly agnostic minds. Karras says of this spirit, the New World conception, animated by the spirit of science, shows itself in the changes that are wrought not only in our views of the importance of science, but also in practical affairs, in the nature and administration of justice, in the education of children, in our judgment concerning social as well as international affairs, in the way we consider the occurrence of great disasters, such as earthquakes or volcanic eruptions, and in many other things. The spirit of the Middle Ages, with its penal code of barbaric punishments, its cruelty in pedagogy, its narrowness in nationalism and religion, retreats step by step, while truer and broader views that are being more and more universally recognized herald the advent of an age of science. As a straw showing which way the philosophical and metaphysical wind is blowing in this first decade of the 20th century, and as an instance of the recognition of the situation by the orthodox authorities, I call your attention to the following quotation from the leading editorial appearing in the Interior of Chicago in its issue of August 26, 1909. Coming as this does from the editorial pages of this well-known religious journal, the statement is of remarkable interest to those who are familiar with the modern trend of thought, and particularly in its evident tendency toward the old pantheistic conceptions. The editorial says, "What prejudice modern philosophy against a personal God? Contemporary philosophers generally assume that it has become impossible in the present age to think of God as a person. Nobody nowadays is an atheist. Everybody insists that he believes in God. But if he has aspirations to be recognized as of the guild of the philosophers, he hastens to add that though he believes in God, he does not believe in a God. He conceives God as impersonal, the great cause pervading the universe. Should anyone in the face of this persist in teaching that God is an individual being, with faculties of consciousness, emotion, and will, these philosophers by that token rate him no thinker." Plain men naturally wonder what it is that the philosophers have found out new to make them so sure God is not individual. This answer may not be philosophic, but it is believed fair. The present swing to pantheism is not because thinkers have discovered any new facts or developed any new logic which makes personality in God incredible, but because the doctrine of monism is the prevailing creed in metaphysics today and pantheism goes easily with that. But answering after this fashion manifestly throws back the inquirer to another question. Why do modern philosophers so unanimously take to monism? And that answer is not easy. The monist, of course, says he believes in monism because it is true that nothing else rationally explains existence. And the modern monist is as dogmatic about it as ever the old-time Calvinist was about his five-pointed creed. When you hear the withering scorn with which he speaks of the exploded dualistic conception of the universe, you feel that they must have been poor fools indeed who ever ventured to hold that idea. The fact is, however, that the issues at stake between monistic philosophy and opposing propositions are questions that men have been thinking of ever since they thought at all about the kind of world they were living in. And the pendulum of speculation has first swung toward the monistic idea and then away from it, leaving the puzzle of it all still unsettled. And although it seems brash to say it in the face of practically all the metaphysicians of the time, even one who knows he is very much of a non-metaphysician may venture the opinion that the present ascendancy of monism is just another swing of the pendulum, which settles nothing, but is presently to be succeeded by an opposite aspect of philosophy. At least, the appearance of Professor William James as a pluralist suggests that monism is not just sure of permanence. The doctrine of monism is that all the universe is just one thing, one reality, one substance, and that all the different things men see are merely phenomena of the one universal thing. Whence it is easy to proceed to calling that one thing God, which is pantheism. Monism doesn't have to teach divine impersonality, however, for if a monist holds that the one unifying reality which composes the universe is mind, then it is at least philosophically possible to conceive that mind as possessing consciousness, reason, purpose, love, and all the other attributes of personality. But the general fact law, that if monism does not require an impersonal deity necessarily, it arrives there very readily indeed. As long, therefore, as monism persists, the plain man need not be surprised to hear a great deal of pantheistic talk among those to whom metaphysics is a more vivid subject than life. The writer of the above editorial is right when he gives to the general scientific philosophical thought the credit for having turned men's minds in the direction of monism, the doctrine of which he correctly states as that all of the universe is just one thing, one reality, one substance, and that all the different things men see are merely phenomena of the one universal thing. But is he likewise right in his conclusion that when that conception is once held in the mind, it is at least philosophically possible to conceive that mind as possessing consciousness, reason, purpose, love, and in the other attributes of personality? Is there not a vast difference between an absolute principle and a relative personality? Another straw is seen in the popularity of poems bringing out the idea of the oneness of all, as, for instance, the following. Illusion by Ella Wheeler Wilcox. God and I in space alone, and nobody else in view. And where are the people, O Lord, I said, the earth below and the sky overhead, and the dead whom once I knew? That was a dream, God smiled and said. A dream that seemed to be true. There were no people living or dead. There was no earth and no sky overhead. There was only myself and yon. Why do I feel no fear, I asked, meeting you here in this way? For I have sinned, I know full well. And is there heaven, and is there hell? And is this the judgment day?
Nay.
Those were dreams, the great God said, dreams that have ceased to be. There is no such thing as fear or sin. There is no you. You never have been there. There is nothing at all but me. When such verse as this, verse which utters sentiments and expresses ideas, as radical and as advanced in line of absolute idealism as any philosophical concept mentioned in this book, not accepting the Vedantic idea, then are we not warranted in believing that the wind is blowing strongly from a certain quarter of the world of thought? We not warranted in calling attention to the fact that the pot is bubbling very fiercely, and that certain ingredients are appearing very frequently and forcibly upon the surface of the seething compound. and in believing that when the material is finally poured forth and exposed after cooling, then the new thing will be strongly colored with pantheistic idealism?